So 232, today we're talking about some standouts in last night's matchup between Utah and Chicago. And Utah, they came away with this one late with a goal later on in the game from Lawson Krause. And it was surprisingly a low scoring game for the most part. You look at how Utah is able to play. They have a lot of offensive minded defensemen. They have a lot of attackers inside their forward group. They have an underrated power play unit. I feel like when it comes to Utah and how they play, their identity should just they're more leaning on the offensive side of the puck, and they've gotten better over the course of the season. I feel like they're right around that 500 edge right now, and they've just kind of been there and steadily there over the course of the last month or so and the last little while. And so with Utah, they need these games. They need to win these games, and they need to take away a lot more of these games down the final stretch of the season in order to maintain and try and get in a playoff spot. I feel like it for them, it's really important to be able to not only come away with wins, but wins that are not close. And I feel like a lot of these close games with Utah, it's kind of tough to evaluate them in terms of what they'd be as a playoff team. But you look at how they played yesterday, they were overall very effective. And I thought one of the guys that was really noticeable was outside of Clayton Keller, because we could talk about him all day, was Lawson Krause. I thought Lawson Krause was one of the better players in this game for Utah. And honestly, I didn't notice too many guys outside of Krause and Keller. And it's really weird to say Kraus in that mix because Kraus is not typically a guy you notice a ton all the time. But when it comes to his ability, yes, he was a former high draft pick. And he was a guy that could be relied upon in all situations for them. He's a power forward. He brings a good scoring touch around the net. He's really good and tight with his hands. And he's got that innate a power forward like ability to where he can really go through guys, but also go around them. So he brings the best of both worlds in that sense. I think guys like Josh Doan was also very effective. Logan Cooley was okay in this game, but I thought Josh Doan was very effective in terms of his checking ability, his angles on the forecheck, how he's cutting ice in half, and how he's using his feet to really cut guys off and be able to make plays in that regard and also create forecheck retrievals. I think when you look at the makeup of Josh Stone's game. He doesn't need more AHL time, but the problem with him is right now is he hasn't been able to find a consistent role in the NHL because he can play in Tucson and he can play a top line role in Tucson. But when you call him up to Utah, Utah has a lot of scoring wingers. They have a lot of guys who are very similar to him in terms of style. So it just creates a sense of depth with him in the lineup, but also a sense of confusion to the point where we don't really know what he is as an NHL player quite yet. But he's effective and he's all around very effective. He can play defense, he can play offense, he can play in transition with the puck. He is a guy you want to have in all situations, and he's a guy you can rely upon in all situations too. So you get a guy like Josh Stone who played really well yesterday. That was a really promising sign. And then outside of that, I thought Clayton Keller was really effective. Like Clayton Keller, when you look at his game, he fits the mold of like a Patrick Kane style player, where he can manage the pace, he can manage the tempo, he can slow plays down, but also speed them up simultaneously. And he does a really good job and really effective job of doing both. And I feel like when it comes to talking about Clayton Keller's game, you're getting a guy who can play all around very effective offensively. You can rely upon him offensively. He can just be able to be involved in many different situations. And then on Chicago's side, I thought Ryan Donato was very effective. And leading up to the trade deadline, there's a few more guys in Chicago that could get traded, could very well get traded, but I wouldn't guarantee on those guys getting moved. Like Ryan Donato is one of them. Yes, he's having a career year. He's on pace for around 60 points, which for him is unbelievable because he's usually a guy that can be a bottom six player who can put up around half of that. And the pace he's at now, he's on pace for around 60. So he's on pace to double that on one of the worst teams in the league, which is remarkable when talking about Ryan Donato and his game. And I think this is the year you have to trade him. Honestly, I think this is the year you have to take advantage of his value. We saw that last year. Jason Dickinson was a hot commodity at the trade deadline. And I know it's a slightly different situation. Dickinson's a little bit older, But when talking about Donato, if you can get a first round pick and maybe even a prospect for him with how his value has been soaring this year, I think you take that and you run because it's not likely you're going to see a season like this out of Ryan Donato next year and even in years further. There's no guarantees. So I think the Hawks need to capitalize on that right now. I think with Seth Jones is an interesting one because when you look at Seth Jones, I don't necessarily see him getting moved. I think if he gets moved, it's more of a summer deal than anything else. I don't see him getting moved within the next week or so. I just don't see it happening. It just doesn't seem realistic. I think when it comes to Chicago, moving him in the summer would be a smarter option and it would just make more sense, even for some of the teams that are looking to acquire him. But he was really good yesterday. And his power play tally was really nice, where he circled around the ozone and then he shot from the flank, ended up scoring 2 shots on that as well. Just was very effective. And then Teuvo Teravainen, another guy who was really effective. I think the main trio of guys that stood out this game, it was Donato, it was Seth Jones, and it was Teuvo Teravainen. I think those guys were the most noticeable to me. And those are the only guys that actually showed up on the stat sheets too. So when you're talking about Teravainen, I think he's had a much better last, I would say, 2 months or so of the season now. The it's tough to say. Like this, the start of the season, he was steady, he was reliable, and then he kind of dropped off and tapered off a little bit. But the last little while, he's ramped it up a little bit more quietly, but in a subtle manner. So he's been effective, and I really, really like his playmaking touch. And I noticed it a lot yesterday, like how he bumps pucks, how he moves pucks to the middle, how he can make one touch plays, one touch passes with his head up. He's got that subtle awareness to be able to find players around him and find lanes around him that are easy to find, but he just makes the read quickly. And that's what really stands out to me in talking about Teuvo Teravainen's game, how he's able to process situations and also how he's able to interpret that space and really manage that space. So Teravainen's very effective when it comes to that. And I honestly think outside of that, there weren't necessarily a ton of standouts. Like there were guys who were noticeable. There were guys who showed some flair, but there weren't a ton of guys that were like eye popping at you from both sides in this game. I thought it was weird because both teams have talented players. Obviously, Utah has the edge there, but I thought I would notice a little bit more from Utah's side and a little more pop from Utah's side, especially this being a home game. But I think Chicago played okay. I also think Utah played okay. I think both sides really played okay. There wasn't really a standout team. It was even for most of the game, and up until Lawson Krause's goal that put Utah ahead 2-1, this game could have really went either way, and I would not have been surprised to see it go even to overtime or perhaps even a shootout as well.